Hey everyone, Pastor George here, and I am bringing us our Wednesday Bible study recap. Best time of your week. I know it is. All right, so today we finished up Philippians. So we did Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 23. And we had a lot to talk about today. A really great discussion. People brought up wonderful points and questions about things, mainly around the most famous verse in this chapter, and that is Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Of course, it is sometimes through Christ who strengthens me. That's who the hymn is talking about, so that's fine. Um, and it's an incredibly famous verse, right? It's one of the most quoted, highlighted, texted, whatever verses of the Bible, right up there with Jeremiah 29:11 and the 23rd Psalm, stuff like that, right? So it's incredibly popular. I gave examples of how if you go to Hobby Lobby, you're gonna find stuff with Philippians 4:10 written, 4:13 written all over it, right? All over it. And so we talked about that verse. And of course, that verse is very famous. It's, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, him being Christ. Now, when most people apply this verse, they apply it wrongly. And I'm not saying this about any of you out there who this is your favorite verse. Maybe you apply it this way, in which case it should change. But maybe you apply it the way that Paul does, in which case, perfecto, mucho better. The most people apply this verse is saying that I can do anything because God is going to work through me and I can do it, right? I can get the promotion, I can finish the marathon, I can do all of these other types of things because God is going to give me the strength to do it, right? I can lift one more set or something like that, right? Can pass that test. Now, you certainly can be strengthened by God to do all of those things. But that is not what Paul is talking about in this verse. It actually is a lot more, not negative, I don't want to say negative, but it's done in a circumstance that is not positive, right? Because if you have Philippians 4 open and you read these preceding things, Paul is talking about how we should be content in every situation, right? And how he has been content in many things and in nothing, right? And when we think about this verse, the way that we should actually try to apply it to our lives is by seeing times when we've been in great despair, in great tragedy, and things like that, and still knowing that God can help us and strengthen us even through these things. Because we're able to say this, like Paul, because we have a very, very deep view of God's sovereignty, right? Very deep view of it. And the reason we have that is, one, because it's based in the Bible, and we see that throughout both the Old and the New Testaments. In fact, the other verse, 29:11, is all about God's sovereignty, that even though Jeremiah 29:11, even though the Israelites, the Judahites are going to go through this incredibly difficult time of having their country destroyed and then moved somewhere else, they are going to be okay because God has plans that will prosper them, right? That you have to trust in God's sovereign plans. And that's what Paul is talking about with being content, right? So this idea that we can do anything through Christ who strengthens us is this idea that even though we are going through difficult circumstances and times are tough and we may face death, right? We know that we're going to be able to conquer everything, whether it's in this world or death itself, because of what Christ has done, and we're trusting in God's sovereign will, right? That's what Philippians 4:13 is all about. And that's rightly why it should be so loved, right? Paul has this wonderful ability of being able to phrase things in a way that is just so beautiful, and so simple and so succinct. And it's just really great. And that's one of those verses. So if you apply Philippians in the way that Paul would want you to, and it's one of your favorite verses, go for it. I think that's great. And next, we talked about giving, because actually that's what the majority of this final passage is about. Because in verse 4:10, he says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly now at length you have revived your concern for me. And this concern that he's talking about is this gift of things that the Philippians sent to Paul through Epaphroditus, who is the person from the Philippian church that we talked about earlier. He comes and he brings gifts. Now, when we think of giving in ministry, we usually think of giving in terms of like money. And that might have been a part of what Epaphroditus brought. But in the Roman jail system, which I've kind of mentioned before, you weren't allowed they really only fed you. All the other needs of life were basically supplied to you from people on the outside. So if you didn't have anyone on the outside, then you didn't get those supplies. And that's why Paul recommends visiting prisoners and stuff like that, visiting people who are in prison, right? It's not just to give them your presence, although that's very important, and that's the reason we do it today. But we do it back then so you could make sure that they were being taken care of, right? That you could get them clothing, get them medicine if they were sick, right? That type of stuff. And better food, things like that. So Epaphroditus comes and brings this to Paul, and he is extremely grateful. And so he's writing in thanks to the Philippians. And something that's interesting here is we talked about giving. And of course, it's like, how much should we give? And then 10% came up. And then people probably are rightly cynical enough about me that they know I was like, all right, so, but how much are we called to give? Right. And, they were saying 99%, 100%. And, that's fair, knowing me. But actually what I'm saying is I actually would not say that you should give 100% of your income to the church, because that's very bad stewardship, or 99%, right? You need to be able to take care of yourself. As Paul says, those who do not work do not eat, that type of thing, right? So you need to be able to care for yourself. But one of the things that's interesting here when it comes to this is that I usually look at when we are as Christians, right, we are called to give 100% of ourselves, and we can do that through all sorts of ways. But when it comes to money specifically, which is the thing that maybe we are most treasured of, basically we need to be willing to sacrificially give it up if it is for the kingdom, right? So if there's a situation that we are presented with where we might have to give up a large sum of money, but we know it is the right and Christian thing to do, then we do it. And I think that that's kind of what Jesus is getting at in that very famous story of him and the rich young ruler, where the guy comes to him and Jesus tells him he has to give up everything. Now, we rightly, when we read that story, look back and say, well, Jesus isn't saying that we all have to give up of our wealth. And that's true. That's not what that story is about. What it's saying is Jesus is calling this guy to do that. And for him, that's an impossibility, at least at that time. And so, because he just loved his money too much, or that's kind of what we're led to believe. And so we as Christians need to understand that if we are called to a situation where we do have to give up everything for the kingdom, then we shouldn't hesitate in doing that, right? And I mean, like, it should be clear. I'm not saying, some pastor comes up and says, you have to give me 100% of your money, and you feel as though, you're obligated. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when there's very clear command or understanding on your part that you have to give things up, then that is what you do. And I've done that in my life. I won't. You can ask me about it in person. I won't share it online for everyone to think. But I've sacrificially gave before. Maybe some of you have sacrificially given before, and it's difficult, but it really allows you to trust God. I mean, there's a reason that tithing is such an important part of the Christian life, because it's our way of giving God even more control. And when you do that, you see just how much more he blossoms. And so stuff like that. So that's what we talk about. As Paul says here, treasures in heaven, right? Fragrant offering. So that's it. That's what we talked about today. So I will see you guys next Wednesday. I am doing a Bible study next Wednesday on one of the Christmas stories. So I'll give a recap of that. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for our mailbag. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.